Good evening. Thanks for joining us. The Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education met tonight discussing crucial boundary changes that could shape the district's future. An advisory committee officially recommending scenario C for boundary adjustments, which is the third option of consolidating and closing existing schools and building new ones. In this First Alert update, Emily Riley explains how it could impact where your children attend school.
After several work sessions, revisions, and community surveys, an advisory committee officially recommended the third scenario for boundary changes. As we've reported, the district is adjusting to declining student enrollment and a tight budget.
I wasn't surprised by the recommendation. I know the enormous work and effort that's been put into looking at all the options and trying to make the best decisions on behalf of our kids.
Some key components of Scenario C include a new elementary school being built on the current Kennedy Elementary site, which would consolidate MacArthur, Keller, and Kennedy Elementary schools. Elmore Elementary would be slated for closure, and its attendance would be split between Chapel and Lincoln Elementary. The boundary for Beaumont Elementary would be extended east to the Fox River to accommodate Elmore students moving to Lincoln and would affect the portion of Tank's attendance boundary south of Mason Street. Doty and Langlade Elementary are also set to be consolidated.
We had a question and answer session afterwards.
Community feedback shows a more than 45% approval rating, nearly 25 points more than Scenario B and 30 more than A. However, the increase does not come without other areas of concern.
Based on location and current boundaries, Elmore students would not move to the new school. So what are we doing right now to address those inequities that the current recommendations would create?
The board says they will continue to discuss how they can maintain student well-being and stability during a time of change. On June 24th, the board will vote on the boundary changes and have an anticipated timeline of the 2026 to 2027 school year. Reporting in Green Bay, Emily Riley, Action 2 News.